Hello, this is Hands-on DevOps with Ansible. This is Section 2, Packaging Applications for Rapid Deployment. This is a busy section. We'll be talking about taking software from artifacts to deployment, using Packer with Ansible and Amazon Web Services, writing and using Ansible roles, using Ansible templates and variables, working with the Ansible Vault to keep safe our production secrets, deploying to an Amazon Web Services production environment, and then doing rolling updates of our application in that environment without any downtime. Taking software from artifacts to deployment. In this video, we'll look at getting our build artifacts into a usable form. We'll look at an example AWS deployment architecture, and we'll do a brief demonstration. So when we talk about build artifacts, we really talk about taking some piece of software that we've written or otherwise gotten, putting it into a state where we can run it. That might be a native executable, it might be something like a Java jar file, or it might just be the source files for something like Python or Node.js. Now, when we talk about an assembled application, on the other hand, now we're talking about, if we're using Docker or some similar environment, we're talking about a containerized image, or if we're just installing on a physical or a virtual machine, we're talking about some disk image. And there's a big difference between these two because the assembled application, of course, it includes our build artifacts, but it also includes a number of other things that we need: operating system, libraries, a language runtime environment like the Java Virtual Machine or Node.js, and any configuration files that our application might need in order to run. And of course, our application might run in a distributed environment with multiple containers or multiple machines, and so we need to figure out how to get to that kind of environment as well. And so it's really, when we talk about the DevOps pipeline, a lot of it, or the most important part of it, is going from these build artifacts, which we understand, these build servers and compilers, and we know how to do that, and taking it all the way to an assembled application in as automated a fashion as we possibly can. And of course, when we're talking about taking our build artifacts for our application and going out to this assembled application, this is where Ansible can come in and can automate a lot of this process for us. This is really where Ansible has its strength, and that's why you'll see in these videos, you'll see Ansible used for exactly this purpose in our DevOps pipeline. So in order to illustrate that a little bit, let's look at an example of an AWS deployment architecture. So this is going to be a web application in Amazon Web Services. It's backed by a database. So we'll start with a database virtual machine that's running in AWS Elastic Compute Cloud, or EC2. So once we have our database virtual machine there, and it's been set up correctly with the right database and user so that our application can use it, we can go ahead and we can deploy our application as a set of virtual machines also running in EC2. But when we deploy our application, we want load balancing across these. We want to be able to easily create new instances if our load increases or we have a failure. And so we'll use an AWS auto scaling group in order to deploy multiple virtual machines, all of which will share the same database, so they're presenting the same data. Of course, we want to present a single front end so that users can use it, and so we also deploy an elastic load balancer in Amazon Web Services. And what this does is it receives incoming web traffic from users, and it routes that traffic back to an instance of the application so the application can actually use it. So what we have here is pretty much all of the components that we need for a typical web application deployment to Amazon Web Services. It's a scalable deployment, and it's one that's got some failover capability built into it. There is one more piece that we need. If we're going to have an auto-scaling group, we need a launch configuration, and that will just tell the auto-scaling group exactly which Amazon machine image to use for our application virtual machine. It'll configure the instance type, a couple of other things like that. So then the question becomes, if in order to go from build artifacts, which were pretty simple, it's a web application, it's Node.js, so it's just some JavaScript. We're going to go all the way to an assembled application. Now we're looking at something that looks kind of big and complicated. How much of this entire architecture can Ansible automatically deploy and configure for us? And the answer is quite a lot of it. Ansible can actually configure automatically every single thing that you see here. And so over the course of this section, we'll look in detail at each of the pieces of this architecture and exactly how Ansible can automatically provision and configure and install and do everything that we need to go from build artifacts all the way over to an assembled application, completing our DevOps pipeline. So for this video, I'd like to take a minute to show you a demonstration of all of these pieces together. So we'll start by looking at the build script that kicks it all off. The build script uses Packer, which is a tool that we'll look at. What it does is it assembles an Amazon machine image for us so that we can launch our application from that machine image. But Packer does that by delegating the provisioning work to Ansible. So Packer will talk to Amazon Web Services, it will create an instance, it will run Ansible against that instance. Once that instance has then been configured, installed, and set up with our web application, it then captures the content of that turns into an Amazon machine image, and then we can launch multiple instances from that template. Once we've used Packer to build our Amazon machine image, we read a manifest.json that it produces in order to get the actual identifier for that machine image, and then we pass that to another Ansible playbook. So this Ansible playbook has the job of actually deploying our web application. So it deploys the Elastic Load Balancer, it deploys the launch configuration, it deploys the auto scaling group, all of the pieces that we identified that run in Amazon Web Services. Let's go ahead and we'll kick that off so you can see what that looks like. I'm going to run the build.sh script that we just saw. You can see as Packer starts, it launches an instance in AWS. This is the instance that it will run Ansible in to install and configure our web application. Once that web application is installed and configured, it will capture the Amazon machine image that then has been configured. So let's go over and we'll look at Amazon Web Services really quick. So if I refresh this, you can see we have an instance running, which is a Packer builder. And what this is doing is it's running Ansible against this instance. Once this is finished and it captures the Amazon machine image, you'll see that in this list here. This list has a couple of other images that I've built previously, and so what will happen is another entry in this list. Once we have that Amazon machine image, we can then go on to use Ansible to automatically deploy to Amazon Web Services all of the pieces that we need to run our application. So that starts with a launch configuration. The launch configuration identifies the Amazon machine image that we're going to use and the instance type of the auto scaling group that we're going to run. So once that launch configuration is in place, we can use it to automatically deploy an auto scaling group with Ansible. That identifies the number of instances we want to run, and then AWS will go ahead and start those instances. Those instances will be based on our Amazon machine image, our AMI, and so they'll already have our application installed, they'll already have it configured, it just has to start up and run. Once we have those instances up and running, and you can see them running here, they get associated with the Elastic Load Balancer. The Elastic Load Balancer then provides that front end for all of the incoming web traffic, and then it routes that traffic to those back-end instances. You can see the same two instances here being marked in service to show that it's communicating with them and it's routing traffic to them. So altogether, with all of those pieces that were all built and deployed automatically using Ansible, we have our complete application. You can see the instance of it here. So just to recap, that consists of an Elastic Load Balancer that's serving as our web front end. It's routing traffic to individual instances of our web application that are running in an auto scaling group, and those are using a database virtual machine that we created also in AWS, and all of the pieces here were deployed and provisioned automatically using Ansible. So that finishes up our little demonstration of how we can use Ansible to provision and deploy an application in AWS. Over the next several videos of this section, we'll look at these individual components in detail and the tools that are involved in addition to Ansible in order to do this correctly.